I'm here. Sorry, went away for a bit.
That's okay. All right, I'm going to switch over to the webinar now. I'm just going to give it a minute for everyone to join. Okay, I think most people are probably in now, so I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this discussion about navigating STEM as a person of colour in academia. My name is Lauren. I'm one of the moderators and the co-founders of the BIPOC STEM network who are hosting this event. I'm a third year DPhil student in the Department of Zoology at the University of Oxford.
Hi, I'm Sara. I'm also going to be co-chairing this event, and I'm a third year DPhil student in the University of Oxford and in the Zoology department as well.
So just a few housekeeping things before we get going. We are using Zoom's automated captions for this event. So if you're currently seeing what I'm saying and you don't want to, or you're not seeing what I'm saying and you would like to, you can click on the closed captions button at the bottom of the screen for further instructions about what to do there. Additionally, we are recording this event and we will make it available to all of you after the event as quickly as we can. So we're going to start with a moderated discussion addressing some of the questions that you all sent in ahead of time. So thank you very much for doing that. And if any questions come up as we're going along, please do submit them in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of these as possible during the Q&A segment at the end of the event. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. I'm going to do this alphabetically. So first up, we have Dr. Tanesha Allen, who is the Athena SWAN coordinator and data analyst for the Maths, Physics and Life Sciences division at the University of Oxford. Then we have Professor Chris Jackson, who is the chair in Sustainable Geoscience at the University of Manchester. We have Dr. Izzy Jayasinghe, who is a UKRI future leader and fellow in Biophysics and Biophotonics at the University of Sheffield. And we have Dr. Craig Poku, who is a postdoctoral researcher in atmospheric physics at the University of Leeds. So thank you all very much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here. Maybe to get us started, you could each just say something briefly about your sort of academic journey to date and how you got to be working in the position that you are now. Maybe we could just go in the order I just said. So Tanesha, if you'd like to go first.
Has Tanesha frozen?
I think we might have lost Tanesha. Maybe someone else can jump in until we manage to get her back.
Yeah, I'll go next then if it was in alphabetical order. So I'm Chris Jackson. I'm a geologist, and I'm currently based at the University of Manchester, having just moved about 3 weeks ago from Imperial College, where I worked as a researcher for 16 and a half years. So just in brief, my background, I was born to Jamaican and Vincentian parents who came over in the late 60s to the UK. I grew up in a place called Derby in Derbyshire, so a very kind of white industrial town where I kind of eventually stumbled into geology while my parents were actually doing real work as nurses at the local hospital. And then I kind of just found my passion in geoscience, and I've kind of followed that ever since. And before going into academia, I worked for a few years in industry, so for an energy company in Norway. So that's a bit about my kind of background. PhD and undergraduate at the University of Manchester as well.
Thank you very much. Maybe Izzy, you could go next.
Great. So my name is Izzy Jayasinghe. I'm a microscopist. So I build and develop microscopy tools to look at cells and molecules and kind of the tiniest underpinnings of life. In terms of background and different identities, I'm a trans woman, I'm a lesbian, I'm a partner to someone who's disabled. I guess, in my academic journey, I've worked in 5 different universities across 3 different countries. I was born in Sri Lanka during the Civil War in the 80s, and had my sort of final sort of school education and sort of university higher education in New Zealand. So I guess I've traveled around quite a bit, seen different flavors of inclusion and diversity in different cultural contexts, as well as how, academia is done differently in different countries.
Amazing, thank you. Craig, maybe you can go next and then we can come back to Tanesha. It's nice to have you back.
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Craig Poku. I am an atmospheric scientist currently based at the University of Leeds. However, in a few weeks, I'll be moving to the University of York to look into urban air quality. A bit about my background. I grew up in London to parents of Jamaican and Ghanaian heritage, where I then did my first degree in mathematics at King's College London a few years back. I then moved up to Leeds, then do my PhD in atmospheric physics, and then I then proceeded to then do a postdoc following that. I guess that because I also identify as queer, one of the things that I ended up finding was that I was being attracted to how EDI initiatives and projects were sort of done within the university context, and how some places do it really well and other places don't do it well at all. And so I guess sort of where my work is now fallen into is now trying to combine the work that I do science-wise in terms of how it can basically help other marginalized communities. So partly the reason why I went into urban air quality is because I could see that link. That's a bit about my background. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then Tanesha.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think the wind destroyed my internet connection. So I'm Tanesha Allen. I am American. It's the first time in 4 years, and I'm not ashamed of saying that. I did my undergrad back in the States. So I went to Washington State University, which is about 5 hours east of Seattle, and I studied animal sciences. And afterwards, I wanted to continue my education and also travel abroad. So I decided to do both of those things at once by doing my master's at the University of Cambridge back in 2013 in zoology. And then I came to the University of Oxford to do my DPhil in zoology in October 2016. And like throughout that, it was always quite hard just being one of the only people of color, and especially one of the only Black people in animal sciences and zoology. And because of that, and especially because of my experiences during my DPhil, I became more interested in doing EDI work and trying to make STEM a more welcoming and inclusive place. So that way, people like me wouldn't have to go through what I went through.
Thanks for those introductions. So I guess a natural sort of first question is, along your academic journeys to your sort of current role, what sort of challenges or obstacles have you faced being a person of colour, and how did you overcome those challenges? We can go with Chris first. Do you want to sort of touch upon some of the challenges and obstacles?
Yeah, I think I always have a slightly atypical answer to this question when I've been asked it before, because I think some of the things that a lot of Black people have been subjected to, I've fortunately not been subjected to. And I think, and I'm not sure why that is, I think it's because Black people are not a homogenous group, and therefore we have different personalities, and therefore people treat us differently actually, and we respond differently to a lot of discrimination maybe that's brought upon us as well. And I think, I've probably brushed off and survived probably because I'm a bit of a thick-skinned bugger. I kind of really do kind of try and just keep that negative energy out of my space. And so I've handled it differently. What I would say is that there are undoubtedly incidents which have happened which I've not seen, and microaggressions. So things that are microaggressions, but also things that have happened when I've not even been in the room, of course. And they're the things that really worry me in a way, because they're unchallengeable by you as an individual. They have to be challenged by the other people who are in the room who may not necessarily have your best interests or the interests of your particular group at heart. So they're the things I think which have potentially stifled my progress, although objectively you could look at my academic journey and see and presuppose it's not been negatively impacted, but undoubtedly I'm sure it has. So I'd say, yeah, I've not had that many things that I've seen visual, but I'm sure there's other things. I mean, I have obviously been subjected to, are you the cleaner? Why are you here? Are you the keynote speaker really? I think there's some of those things that have happened, as well as just the more outright just racism. But I don't think that's really within the academic sphere. I think that's just like non-academics being racist towards me, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. What about you, Izzy? Any particular challenges or obstacles that you face?
I think similar to Chris, I would first of all flag up the fact that, I guess what I have to share is probably filtered through what we call survivorship bias. I am someone who still remains in the pipeline. But I know that it exists. For example, I had two colleagues during my PhD days. So 3 Asian women who did our PhDs together. And I know that I'm the only one now remaining in academia. In terms of ability and skill, we were equals. But I think there are 3 areas that I've faced the bias in the more recent years. And the first one is, as an academic member of faculty, my progression and sort of surviving in academia was tied into funding. So, low success rate in funding that I experienced, I now know when I see the data that's been released that there was some role in that. So I did eventually secure funding, but it was a tougher road. And the other aspect is that I am an immigrant. And I know that people who are people of color who are immigrants are subject to different barriers compared to immigrants who are white. For example, my partner is an Australian, white Australian immigrant. We travel together and we have very different experiences at the border. And it's the same when it comes to accessing public funds and so on. And the third aspect is really the microaggressions that you face on a day-to-day basis. So I had, for example, one instance where a postgraduate student that I was training explained to me that just because Professor James Watson had this theory about the intelligence of people of color compared to white people, that he knew about something, an experiment that we were doing better than I did. And so those are aggressions that you have to take in your stride if you want to get on with it, but can really chip away at your confidence.
Okay, so there's definitely a theme of microaggressions which we'll get onto later. What about you, Craig?
My first experience probably was when I was applying to university, where my head of sixth form at the time said, and I quote, that if I decide to apply to the University of Cambridge with the grades that I have, not only will I be rejected, but I will also blacklist the school from any future applicants who want to apply to the University of Cambridge. Those are his exact words. And I think because of that statement, it definitely meant that I had to have a very early resilience from the early stages of me going through the system. I think it meant as well that there are times where, like, as Chris said, I think that when people discuss the experiences of Black academics, they assume that we all have exactly the same hardships, but actually it doesn't acknowledge the fact that actually we are all have different experiences, and all those experiences do matter to some extent. Well, hold on. No, all of those experiences are valid. That's what I meant to say. More recently, I guess sort of where the barriers that I faced would be the fact that because I'm usually the only Black person in the room, then if I were to make a comment, then for example, I would not be taken as seriously as say some of my white colleagues. But likewise, I'm also fully aware that because I don't identify as a Black woman, for example, that I've got privileges that say some of my other colleagues don't have. And so it really depends on the kind of case by case basis. And it's really kind of like working out which people are going to be there to kind of vouch for me, which people aren't going to be there to vouch for me. In terms of where I am now, it's weird because although I'm in the EDI scene, but I've kind of stepped out the EDI scene for a bit, mostly because I felt that no matter what I was doing, the work was going to be put onto marginalized people. And I just got tired of repeating the same point again and again and again. So I just went, actually, is this worth my energy? Because the time spent for me to focus on these initiatives is taken away from me trying to basically get papers, which ultimately will be the thing that I'll be judged against when I'm trying to go for funding and stuff, which was the big reason why recently I applied for some funding and I didn't get it. It was, I didn't have enough papers. So.
Okay, thanks for that. What about you, Tanesha?
A lot. I guess one of the biggest things is my personality, and that, you know, ever since I was a kid, I've always been shy, quiet, socially awkward, and introvert, which kind of goes against the stereotypes that people have about Black people, and especially Black women, and that we're supposed to be loud and entertaining and all of that kind of stuff. And so when they see me and I'm not, being super outgoing or entertaining them in whatever way, people assume that I'm rude or standoffish, or, some professors during undergrad and, my master's and PhD have assumed I was unmotivated, even though especially in undergrad, I was getting the same grades or even better grades on exams and stuff than my classmates. So I guess since I wasn't, bouncing off the walls, they just made these negative assumptions about me. And because of those assumptions, like, not only did I have to prove to my professors and colleagues that I was a good scientist or researcher or student, which, I mean, everyone has to prove in academia anyways, I also had to prove that I wasn't, lazy or unmotivated or a diva, which, a professor called me once during my DPhil behind my back. So I had to go against those negative assumptions, which just makes it even more difficult and exhausting. And also, like, I had a professor when I said I wanted to apply to Cambridge for my master's, she laughed and said, "Oh, she laughed," and I was like, what's wrong? She said, "Oh, well, Cambridge is a really good school," even though I was in the honors college and had, graduated with honors. So again, you could be the best of the best and people will still assume that you're not supposed to be there, or not, that you're not good enough. And then also, like, microaggressions, like everyone else said, because compared to more overt racism, it's harder to explain why microaggressions hurt so much, especially to your white colleagues, or or even your non-Black friends who are also people of color. So it's hard to explain why it hurts, like why certain things hurt. And then, like, also, and I guess also the gaslighting and with people saying, "Oh, like, are you sure that was racist?" Or, "Oh, maybe they didn't mean it," or, "Maybe you're being too sensitive or you can't take a joke." And then it's just, it's all of that just affects your mental health. Like, like with, Meghan Markle was saying, this past Sunday, like, it's just, it just drains at you after a while. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of you have kind of touched on their microaggressions as being kind of a really big thing, because they're obviously less overt than other types of racism and maybe go unnoticed. Do any of you kind of have experience or have recognized any kind of institutional support that is available to deal with microaggressions, or is that kind of a gap that exists at the minute, do you think?
I'll just say one thing. I think we shouldn't be in a position where we're asking BIPOC people to deal with microaggressions. I mean, good Lord, if we're in the position where we're having to give training courses for people to deal with being discriminated against, I think we've got it the wrong way around. Simply put, I think it's something which we need to make other people aware of who are the ones doing the discriminating, and then punish them. Or if people don't like the word punish, let's call it discipline them, whatever, if they transgress. So I can't quite see how the victim blaming will ever get us where we need to go by training us.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And I guess what I'm wondering is whether there is therefore any sort of reporting systems that you feel work for microaggressions, or any kind of other institutional support that is available that can kind of try to tackle and address those. I can see Craig wants to say something.
I think the short answer is most places don't have something. The long answer is it's very difficult to quantify. So to kind of give a bit of a brief background, at the University of Leeds, we were looking at trying to implement like a reporting system to try and account for microaggressions. But as we were putting this together, we realized there's two things that kind of like ran into problems. The first one was that HR have a different way of dealing with reporting in comparison to, say, standard microaggressions. So they would see it as somebody saying, oh, you don't belong here, versus somebody dealing with like quite severe harassment on the same level in their reporting system, which is a problem in itself. The second thing as well, and actually this is the other thing that I wanted to pick up on, was that within reporting systems, I think that it also requires some form of like training and education for those who don't actually necessarily acknowledge their privilege. One of the things that I've really been kind of like focusing on is this idea of, say, intersectionality. And the way that I now see intersectionality is, so by definition, obviously, that means that when you've got two underrepresented groups that kind of intersect, so for example, me would be that I'm a Black queer person, for example, but I have privileges in the sense that I'm a cis male. And I think that especially within these reporting systems, the problem that you have is that people aren't acknowledging that within the entire spectrum, we have our own privileges. And so that meant that when we were trying to put this reporting system together, a lot of people were like, oh, but all people of color face the same racism. Well, I can tell you that some of the most rampant racism I've received were from non-white people, for example. And so my problem is that if we're going to have a reporting system put into place, you need to have somewhere where people are at least acknowledging, okay, we have privileges, but people don't want to do that, and people don't want to have that conversation because that involves self-reflection and self-awareness, and that's always going to be an issue with these things.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is something we've talked about a lot when we sort of were starting this network. We obviously called it the BIPOC STEM network, but there was a lot of conversation that went into that. And I guess this is something that would be nice to ask you all about, is kind of what you feel the problems are with kind of grouping people of color together. We see this so often, right, as people are grouped as either white or non-white. And Craig just touched upon there some of the big issues that exist with that. But does anyone else have anything to add on that topic?
I'd like to add the point that I think reporting systems are really important to deal with sort of incidents that, you know, of racism and marginalization, but it's really, that is essentially a mechanism of treating a symptom, not the system. So really what, you know, the whole sectors should be looking at is changing the culture in which we work. So there's some, you know, noises being made in the right kind of direction. For example, changing this lone genius kind of model of science and academia, and shifting more towards the belief that we are all in this together and we bring different axes of experience. And I think those things are, they probably have long time scales over which we see the results, but they are really important. And the other thing, echoing both what Craig and Chris said, is the fact that fixing the person is not a great approach. And I have seen, especially over the last several months, things like training individuals to be more resilient. And I think I have seen it being done cleverly. And then I have also seen places where it's about let's fix the black and brown people kind of attitude. And I think that is the wrong approach.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Oh, Tanesha, I can see your hands up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess another issue with the current reporting systems that we have is that oftentimes they ask for evidence, and it's it's hard to really provide some type of evidence of, I mean, not just bullying and harassment anyway, but especially with microaggressions, because a lot of times in academia, our interactions with each other are, in person, or maybe like one-on-one meetings in an office or something. So there's no witnesses, there's no paper trail. And so if you go to someone and say, this person said this thing that was problematic or made me uncomfortable, and then it goes into a formal report or complaint, then it's easy for that complaint to be dismissed because it's your word against theirs, because obviously the person you're complaining about is not going to say, yep, you caught me, I said that thing. So it makes people feel, less likely to, report these, relatively minor things. And it's hard to hold people accountable, which is another thing too, in that, a lot of times these systems, even when there is a complaint, they don't actually hold people accountable. They just give them a stern talking to or a slap on the wrist. But, we're all adults here. We can all deal with a stern talking to. So there's no real, actual consequences. And because of that, people know that they can get away with this. And that if they do want to make any problematic remarks, they should just be sneakier about it next time, which is definitely not the message we should be sending out.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I'm hearing, Jen, oh, sorry, Chris, your hands up.
No, I just wanted to pick up on something Tanesha said there, and regarding encouraging reporting, and something you said, Lauren, about the problematic terminology or the debate about which terms we should be using. I mean, in defense of using groups and terms for groups when we're collecting data, one thing it does afford is protection to very small numbers. So if you're going to be identifiable by saying, I have been harassed, or, I think there's a systemic problem where I work, and you're one of the only few BIPOC people, as soon as you tick that box or those two boxes, you're identifiable. Yet if we aggregate the data and we can sort of anonymize because we have enough racial and ethnic diversity, let's say, then that does afford some protection to those people, and it's more likely to encourage reporting. Now, the thing that then has to happen is that any solutions, quote unquote, you want to put in place to assist the progress of those groups, you need to then make sure they're bespoke to those individuals and not at, we're going to fix BAME people with this thing, right? That's not what it is about. So I have a lot of sympathy with, having worked on the Race Equality Charter, I have quite a lot of sympathy with some of those terms as a mechanism to collect data. Just in defense slightly of those terms. I know it's a bit of a hot topic, but I have seen it used in a way which can be beneficial.
Thank you. And speaking of kind of solutions, one of the other things that we wanted to touch on was that a lot of the solutions we generally see in sort of higher education and academia tend to focus on recruitment. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the sort of recruitment versus retention thing. Craig, do you want to take that?
Now, I did say that I was going to be on my best behavior. However, I don't like the idea that we're so focused on going, oh my God, we're so woke. We're going to bring a bunch of Black kids into academia and it's all going to be great and awesome, when you're going to be dealing with all the same microaggressions that are currently still within the system. That's point one. Point two, I know that if I, as a Black person, am looking for jobs, I don't go somewhere where I know that, oh, I've heard about this incident, oh, I've heard about this situation, oh, I've heard about these kind of like background stories. For example, like, going to be honest with you, when I was thinking about PhDs, I kind of, no, postdocs, I actually crossed off Oxford because I heard some really problematic things within one of the physics groups. And I'm not going to say which physics group, because there may be people listening to this. And if they are listening to this, then you need to talk to your PI. That's the second thing. The third thing as well is that by putting all of your energy into recruitment, it sort of doesn't acknowledge that the problem is there. It's acknowledging that the problem's been fixed. And I think that, especially having worked in like widening participation for a good number of years, I remember quite recently, and I'm not going to say the colleague, but I did end up reporting the colleague, where they made a statement where they were like, oh, we need to get more Black kids into atmospheric sciences because they don't seem to want to engage. One, people do engage. It's just that you're not giving them a reason to engage. And two, going about it that way implies that you're doing what's known as a deficit model, in that you are the superior and they are the people that are going to be benefiting from the system. And I guess the issue is that it's easier to you to just recruit than for you to actually do that idea of like, sitting on the self-awareness. We saw so many people put in their Twitter handles Black Lives Matter, but how many of them have actually gone and looked at the way that they've basically been dealing with microaggressions, the way that they've been dealing with their own personal unconscious biases, the way they've been dealing with the way they've been handling people who don't look like them? I can guarantee you that a number of them haven't. And having seen like the whole Meghan Markle thing come up and seeing how people have been moving mad on the internet, I can guarantee you that that's something that a lot of places aren't doing. So that is my biggest issue with the recruitment side. And I mentioned this at work, and I'm fortunate enough that my new, that the new head of of our institute has acknowledged that and is actually working on trying to tackle the culture before we bring new people in. Because what's the point of bringing all these new people in when they're going to face exactly the same horrible experiences, and then they drop out of the pipeline because they go, actually, you know what, there are other places that will offer me better pay and better protection as opposed to this place. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. Yeah, Tanesha, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so what Craig said is perfect. And like, and also like people talk. People, you bring people into a toxic environment and they deal with microaggressions or more overt stuff. People will go back to their friends, their families, their social media networks and say, don't come to Oxford or Cambridge or wherever because I went through this. And then people see that, they hear that, and then that makes recruitment even harder because they'll say, no, I don't want to go to Oxford because my neighbor or my cousin or someone I follow on Instagram or whatever said that they went through this horrible experience. So why do I want to go there? And like another big issue is that a lot of people tend to equate diversity with inclusivity, and they believe that, oh, if we just bring in a lot of, people of color into this institution, then automatically things will get better, and we don't need to deal with the culture. But just because a place is diverse in whatever metric of diversity we're using, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, whatever, that doesn't mean that things will automatically improve the culture. You can bring, like Craig said, you can bring all these people into a place and you're not addressing the root of the problem. So yeah, it's just, yeah, I have a lot of comments, but I'm going to try and be nice today.
So if we think about existing initiatives that we have, such as like the Athena SWAN, how do you think we can make that more sort of inclusive for people of color, if we're thinking about this issue of like retention and, well, recruitment and retention. I don't know if anyone has any particular comments on that. Yeah, Izzy?
I can speak as someone who actually reviews Athena SWAN award applications. Couple of things is that I know that the current system is going to change, but the way the current system's set up, institutions can apply to have new awards or have their awards upgraded with no mention of what they're doing for racial equity. And I think that's disappointing in this day and age. I am hopeful that the new charter will include axes of race and ethnicity in that, along with a number of other different intersections. But I think more ideally, we would like to see something like the Race Equality Charter being made mandatory for all the institutions. And I think it's quite telling of the nature of the system, and when you know that certain universities play by a different set of rules compared to others. I will name names: University of Oxford, Cambridge, and Imperial College. I think Oxford and Cambridge are assessed on a different set of criteria. And I think we really have to get honest about what the charter's there to serve, and are certain types of diversity and inclusion more important than others. I think in a time where racism is really rampant, Athena SWAN has to stand up for people who are Black and or in ethnic minorities.
Oh, yeah. Craig, do you want to add something to that?
I was going to, but I thought Tanesha also put her hand up first, so I was going to let her go first because I feel like she's more eligible to talk about this before I make my point. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, since I'm working as an Athena SWAN data analyst and coordinator, which is a relatively new position. Yeah, like Izzy said, like the charter is changing, and that they are going to ask departments and institutions to address intersectionality and also gender as a spectrum rather than a binary. But even then, it is disappointing in that Athena SWAN and tends to tack on intersectionality as like an afterthought, like talk about gender equality, and oh yeah, by the way, mention race and all these other issues, which is not how intersectionality should go. It's not, it shouldn't be an afterthought that you just kind of tag on to make your organization or institution seem woke. It's something you need to put, you need to integrate it throughout whatever equality initiatives you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, Craig, if you want to now say your piece.
Thank you. I think also with having sat on all of these boards, all of these panels, and especially, so the one that I've recently been working on is the fund to support Black and minority ethnic PhD students who want to go through academia. One of my biggest concerns is that a lot of places are still seeing it as a tick boxing exercise. So they're seeing it as if we just bring in all of these people, or if we sort that out, or if we do like this like woke campaign, then it seems like it makes a lot of noise, but there's no actual like long-lasting impact. So one of the better examples I've seen of places that have actually gone, no, we need to address this, is probably King's College London, where I did my undergrad, where they acknowledged there was a problem, and over time you see that the distribution of white to minority ethnic staff members is now slowly changing. They're one of the only few places that I've visibly seen it. Of course, there are problems within that. There are probably things that they're probably hiding in the stats and stuff. But in terms of first glance, I'm like, they're actually trying to make a change. And I think that if we are thinking about like, Athena SWAN, the Race Equality Charter, and a number of these really big initiatives, it needs to be done in a way where it's seen as we are trying to actually tackle the culture, as opposed to it just being we're just going to add intersectionality on the end, or if we're going to add like, queer identities on the end, or we're going to add like, gender spectrum as a kind of add-on. It shouldn't be an add-on, it should be the kind of inclusive part within the way that they kind of put it together.
Thank you. Chris, yeah, if you want to go.
I think two things that related to what Craig just said is one, non-disclosure agreements. I think Race Equality Charter and Athena SWAN could be a bit more pointed about, well, actually you need to disclose how many non-disclosure agreements you've issued or people have signed in the last period of this award. So I think that often, well, the obvious concerns you'd have about non-disclosure agreements being signed. And the other one, which is a bit more draconian, and it goes back to my earlier point, I'm happy not to have any of these charters and have any of these websites if I just knew people were being disciplined for transgressions. And so if you want to do something, encourage, build trust and build confidence in your minority, your kind of historically excluded groups by showing them cases where people have been punished for transgressions and making it public, because that then will increase the reporting, and it'll also mean that you're actually doing something. You're actually doing something. And, and one of the, I was going to be well behaved today as well, Craig, but, Imperial College's bullying and harassment case at the very top of the system with Alice Gaston Muir Sanderson. I mean, there is nothing that's going to undermine any attempt you've got at trying to make any sort of pretense of equality, diversion, or any pretense of inclusion, of course, is where you have bullying, which is top down and then actually results in people leaving the employ of the institution and signing non-disclosure agreements. So, I just bored of people signing these things. I think some of the data sifting that goes with it is really useful because it does trigger some introspection. And I've seen that on the Race Equality chart. It's traumatic to look at those graphs, though, I should say, because it's awful. But unless you're going to go beyond that, it's just sinking time into those things for often minoritized groups, right? Excluded groups are doing that work.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think this leads quite nicely. We'll do one more question, then we'll go to the Q&A because I know there's some questions waiting. But we've talked quite a lot about sort of higher up level institutional things that can be done, but on a sort of a lower level, I suppose, in terms of allyship, particularly when we're thinking about sort of power dynamics within academic spaces. What can people kind of do to be better allies, if you like? Because this is what we're talking about here, right? Is rather than putting the burden on people of color, is sort of shifting that burden elsewhere. Oh, Tanesha?
So, I mean, I have a lot of suggestions, and if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards via email or Twitter or, whatever, they can feel free. But I think the underlying message to being a good ally is to stop centering yourself in your allyship. Look at being an ally as being an accomplice, a co-conspirator, Bonnie and Clyde, you are in the trenches with us. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, sometimes make sacrifices, give up your seat at the table to be an ally. Stop trying to center your feelings. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not an ally, you're just more of an acquaintance or something. And also hold your friends accountable, hold your friends and colleagues accountable. Even when there's no people of color in the room, when something happens, hold your friends and colleagues accountable. Because for me, I find it really hurtful and disturbing when, I tell someone that someone has said or done something hurtful or racist or whatever, and then I see them just laughing it up with that same person later on, or giving them opportunities or resources or whatever. And it's and they, at best they might say, oh, I tried talking to them, but they just didn't get in. Oh, well, I tried. And, this half-hearted attempt. And to me, that's not good enough. To me, that's just saying, I'm only willing to be an ally when it's convenient or comfortable for me. And that's not what being an ally is. And also being an ally is a continuous journey. It's not something where you attend one workshop or you read one book and you're like, yep, I'm an ally now. And also being, and also acknowledge that being an ally does not absolve you from having racist or bigoted viewpoints. You can say that you're an ally and still do or say racist things, or you can interact with people of color and still have racist thoughts. It's like, it'd be like a man saying, oh, I can't be sexist, like I'm married to a woman. Like that doesn't make sense. Y'all know how ridiculous that sounds, and that's how ridiculous it sounds when you say, I have a Black friend, or I interacted with a Black person once. So yeah, just it's a continuous journey that you have to, that is not convenient or comfortable. And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't get to call yourself an ally.
Thanks for that. We'll just have a quick, Craig, do you want to go quickly and then we'll do the Q&A?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be quick. Firstly, Tanesha's made some brilliant points, and actually, so on the point of calling your colleagues out when there are no other marginalized people within the room, I think that a lot of times people go, oh, Craig, how can I be an ally? How can I be this? Start small before you think that you can start tackling the entire world. It's usually easier for you to have those really uncomfortable conversations with people that you trust, because you find that they have this aspect of relatability. And I think that's really important. And also the other thing as well is, as an ally, own your mistakes. So if you say something that you didn't intend to be problematic, rather than getting defensive about it, stop, breathe, step back, hold your hands up and go, actually, I'm sorry for this, and this is what I'm going to do to rectify it. For context, I grew up in an environment that was that had a lot of very homophobic and transphobic language, and I realized that as I was going through university, I still ended up having a lot of this unconsciously, until somebody kind of sat me down and went, Craig, you need to get your crap together, kind of thing. And it's something that I'm still working on today. And I consider myself an ally, but that doesn't need to say that my learning stops. And when I do make mistakes and people do call me out, rather than getting defensive, I go, I'm sorry. But that's something that I think a lot of people need to do, because by doing that, kind of like taking that defense down, you then can carry on that learning. So that's really what I wanted to follow up with.
Great points. Yeah. Okay, we'll go on to the questions. So one of the questions here I have is, so how do you stand up to microaggressions? It's obvious reporting is hard. Chris has mentioned the focus should be not on training the victim, but disciplining the aggressor. I think that pathway will take some time, but in the short term, how do we survive it? So Chris, maybe, do you want to start off?
I just don't know if there's a way. I just think because we're all so different, I'm just not sure there's a way you can survive it. I don't know if there's any tools, because people do awful things to you. You're going to be upset. You're going to be physically scared. You're going to be emotionally damaged over various time periods. I just don't know what the answer is to that, because I think it's so personality dependent. I'm happy to fight with racists all day and it doesn't bother me, but that's just because who I am. But I can't train somebody to have that, thick-skinned or arrogant. I have a degree of arrogance with it because I'm pretty happy about who I am and what I can and can't do. And I'm not going to let these people take that away from me, right? So everybody needs to find their own way. Craig's has got a view here. Go ahead.
Yeah, Craig?
I think it's knowing your own boundaries. So unlike Chris, who will fight the racists online, I will not. So I think different people have different ways of how to kind of tackle it. I find that for me, I just don't have the mental capacity to deal with it, because I know that I suffer quite severe anxiety. So dealing with that on a regular basis, I feel like it doesn't get me anywhere. But if that's how you feel allows you to kind of control that space, then that's absolutely up to you. I found that the way that I kind of dealt with it as I got older was actually being surrounded by other queer people of color. And I say that in a more generic sense, because I definitely found that a lot of the experiences that I had, we were able to kind of talk about it in a space that I felt relatively safe about it. So it's having a support network that I was like, that's how I deal with the microaggressions. But a lot of the times when I see it online, I just scroll past, because I don't have the articulation for me to be able to make a point that I feel like it will make that state. So not exactly countering Chris's point, but I think the two things that really kind of sum up from this is this idea of boundaries and being able to understand your own personal boundaries and how far, and once that crosses that boundary, you go no more.
Thanks. Yeah, Izzy, I saw that your hand went up in the beginning. Do you want to add?
Oh, that's okay. I guess as someone who is a bit of a magnet for microaggressions along different axes, race and gender identity and all those things, the strategy that I have used, and I'm not advocating this for everyone, is to identify people who are allies, people who you can go to when you need safety and who will listen to you. And I know that not every workplace has that. And so you have to I have had to in the past get creative and reach out on different platforms like online or in other groups. So similar to Craig, LGBTQ groups and spaces have been helpful. Other EDI places have on many occasions have been helpful. So knowing where your safe spaces are when those things happen, people can give you empathy first and foremost and listen. And I think that's just a safety mechanism that I've had. I'm not saying that it's for everyone.
Thank you very much all for your answers on that. There's been another question come in where someone wants to ask about the role of scientific societies as they're separate from the academic recruitment process, but in a position where they might be able to control funding or other opportunities. Does anyone want to speak on that? Yeah, Izzy?
I can say that I have been involved in a number of sort of learned societies, and I have had falling outs with some of them because of the way they have resisted change. And I'm looking squarely at you, the Institute of Physics, who have used people of color for advertising their award programs and so on, and yet when they announce the outcomes of awards or scholarships year after year, it's poor and appalling. And I think a lot of these learned societies work on the in terms of an internal structure of a hierarchy. So when you make a complaint, it goes up to the council and it's an internal process. And I think we need to change that because these are societal issues and society is looking up to them. And I think and so these learned societies need to be held accountable more publicly and more transparently.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that question? No. Okay, we can move on to another question. So here's another question. Athena SWAN may become a blunter tool as the funding links are being removed by government. What other sticks could we use for EDI progress? Craig?
Not controversial, but I think having EDI work being accounted for within the promotions criteria within an academic setting is very beneficial. So I can't go into too much detail because there's still kind of like some confidentiality within it, but within Leeds, they are seriously taking EDI work into consideration, both either the teaching or the research pathway. Because you find that, for example, you've got people who sit on these panels and they do there was a period where I think I did no research and all I was just doing was EDI committee, widening participation talk, another talk, EDI. And this is something that you hear primarily within like marginalized academics. And then it means that by the time it gets like to promotions round and stuff, you don't have all of the other aspects that are being accounted for. So I think that more universities should do that, especially if they are trying to say they are committed to EDI stuff, because the reality is that I can't see that in the near future that it's going to be like primarily white people focused on EDI stuff. I can't get the wording to sound right, but I think you kind of get where I'm trying to go from there. That's really my big kind of like, if you want a solution, that's a solution that I would seriously suggest.
Thanks for that. I guess to kind of try and ask more about your own sort of personal experiences, are there sort of any EDI initiatives particularly focused on race that you've sort of noticed come into play during your time in academia, which will obviously differ for all of you, that have actually had a positive impact, whether that be on you or on, you know, the general environment that you're working in? Yeah, Izzy?
I can give an example from not from the UK, from New Zealand, where I studied mostly and then worked briefly. There was an initiative called Whakapikiaki, which is to get Indigenous Maori people into sort of STEM spaces. And I think there was a really crucial conflict between what, you know, the way we were sort of from a Western perspective were carrying out science and how that sort of collided with sort of Indigenous sort of Maori values. For example, we were working on things to do with medical research, and you know, the idea that, you know, you could donate you know, human material for research was against that Maori sort of beliefs and didn't sit very well. And they've run this program for a number of years now, where they get young Maori people to come and observe us in the labs. And so initially it was just set out as a way of harmonizing sort of the Western approach of science to Indigenous culture. But what has happened as a result of it is that some of my colleagues said that they've actually seen an increase in, you know, Maori youth sort of taking up science subjects and coming through to scientific degrees. So I think these programs have a really positive impact that you can't quantify, not at least in the short term.
Craig, yeah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I have an example of a widening participation project, which I felt had really positive impacts. So back when I was at King's, I was part of a project called the King's Factor, which was focused on students who were from comprehensive schools, which primarily had Black and minority ethnic students, who would then come to King's College once a week, where we basically gave them really difficult maths problems. But through doing that, you found that it allowed these students to feel empowered and actually not only look at wanting to do maths, but also look at doing other STEM subjects. And what was really good about the project was that it wasn't focused on just getting students wanting to go to King's, but it was also focused on students wanting to do science subjects across the country. So we had students applying to Oxbridge, we had students applying to Edinburgh, we had people applying up. And what's really nice about a project like that was not necessarily the short-term impact, but now there are a few of those students who found me through Twitter who were like, oh, I remember you because you're on this project, who are now doing PhDs themselves. And it's one of those things where you're like, it's one of those slow burner projects that I feel like has the most amount of impact, because you find that they then basically carry that ethos through everything that they do. And I'm aware, like, for example, like Oxford have the unique summer school as an example of that, which I do think that the benefit of a program like that is that even if they don't necessarily go to the university, but you're thinking about it on a much wider scale. And I think that's really the key thing here. So those are two examples of, well, the King's Factor is one that I've been involved with. That's an example of how widening participation should be done, in my opinion.
Cool. Okay. As a last question, so we're wondering if there's any young BIPOC scientists that are watching this now. What would each of you say, just very briefly, to them, to sort of any aspiring young BIPOC, if they're watching this now? What would be words of advice would you say to them?
Silence.
We want to end on quite a positive note because we talked about quite difficult subjects.
No,
if there's anyone, that's watching, that's like, oh, I'm really interested.
No, I think Craig's. I think. Well, mainly what Izzy was saying. I think find people to support you, or like be open to being supported. Because I think a lot of it is down to luck, and a lot of it is down to support. And I think, this notion of a meritocratic system will benefit you is just not true. And so therefore, I think there's other things that are needed. I'd love a meritocratic framework to work, but that means that everybody's got access to the same opportunity, of course, right? And that's not the case at the moment. So I think that's what I would say is kind of look around, try and get connections with people who look like you, or you feel you have you identify with their experience, and they don't therefore have to look like you or come from your background, but people who talk to you in a way that feel like they're treating you well and are being supportive, I'd say.
That's really nice. Yeah, Craig?
Following to what Chris said, I think that the opportunities that you do get within science and academia is unfortunately down to luck. But obviously, the more people that you meet, the more chances you get. But I definitely found that what's kind of kept me going, because for a very long time, I was like, Craig, I'm bouncing from academia. Why are you doing this to yourself? And I know this person isn't watching this, but Sam Giles is the reason why I'm still here, because she was one of those people that allowed me to have the space where if I had any questions, then I could feel free to go to her. But she also gave me the space to feel safe and actually acknowledge that, yes, there is some luck, but that support network was the thing that kept me going. So I think the advice that I gave to any BIPOC academics or non-BIPOCs is, if you are really interested in a bit of science that really intrigues you, go for it. And to kind of deal with the reality of being BIPOC within this system, having a support network, I think, is something that is really crucial. And you'll find that even though you have those really hard days, you have those days where you can literally laugh at the fact that somebody's done a reply all to every single person in the university. It's little things like that that I definitely found help keeps going. So that's my kind of positive end to this.
Tanesha?
Yeah, so I mean, adding on to the whole, well, aside from, finding your support network, which is especially useful, especially when you're dealing with microaggressions, and after a while you think like, after a while you start to think you're being too sensitive or you're over analyzing things, and it kind of gets to a point of gaslighting. So finding your support network is just, someone who you can just vent to, that for me especially during my PhD, that was useful to have other people say like, yeah, like I've experienced this too, like you're not going crazy. But also something that someone said to me at the beginning of my PhD was, look into the history of your field, because, we are there. Like, even though mainstream media and textbooks or whatever don't really celebrate the achievements and successes of, BIPOC researchers and scientists, and especially Black researchers and scientists, like we have, made contributions to all of these fields. So, look into the history and you'll find that there is someone out there like you. For example, in zoology, it was a Black American man who found out that bumblebees see in color and that they recognize patterns. And of course, you're not going to, hear about that, but yeah, just know that, you are there.
Thank you.
So lovely. Oh, sorry. So that's so lovely. Izzy, do you want to go next?
I guess my message is dream big. I guess, don't hold yourself back. If you feel like your environment's not quite supportive, reach out in other means. It might not seem like that, but I think it's not completely unfounded that I think that we are progressing. I think we are making progress, even though slowly, to making academia and STEM inclusive to Black people, people of other ethnic minorities and other minorities. So don't put it off, just dream big, and when your time comes, the system will be readier than it is now.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you, all of you, for your contributions tonight. It's been a really great panel and a really good discussion. So a big thank you on behalf of everyone watching, because I know the audience can't interact, but thank you very much for being here tonight. It was really great. And I think we'll end it there. So thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, everyone.